All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first Cohort 27 training meeting. Thank you guys for joining us today. Let me see if I can share my screen. Sorry. All right. Get where I can see everybody here. Okay. All right. Again, welcome. Good morning. Thank you guys for joining us. My name is Amanda Rylant, and I am the coordinator of the state 21st century program. And today will be our first Cohort 27 training. Sorry if I seem a little off. It's been a crazy morning already. I had someone in my office up until like 2 minutes before the meeting started. But I really do appreciate everyone for being here. Let me start by kind of talking about our staff with the 21st Century program. And forgive me for the way I'm sharing my screen. If I try to do it in presentation mode, it throws everything off and I can't see the chat. And I can't see you all's here. So I'm doing it this way. Hopefully everyone is able to still see this very well. But what's on your screen now is the 21st Century ALSDE team members. I've already introduced myself. We also have with us today Carla White and Dr. Melissa McKinney, who are our 21st Century Federal Program Specialists. I'm not sure if Kelly is here, but we have also had Kelly Smith, Dr. Kelly Smith, work with our program in the past as well. But she's still going to be on our team, but she's going to back away a little bit and handle our consolidated applications. So just to give you a quick background, typically our 21st Century team, we are over 21st Century, but we're also over other federal program, or we're also responsible for checking the consolidated applications for LEAs for their other title programs as well. And so our whole team has been doing double duty for the past couple of years. And it can cause some confusion because the way that 21st Century funds are spent is a little different than the way that other title program funds are spent. Some things are allowable for 21st Century that's not allowable for Title I and vice versa. So we decided that for this upcoming fiscal year, we are going to split that work, and Carla and Melissa are just going to focus on 21st Century applications and support. And then Dr. Kelly Smith is going to handle all of the consolidated applications and kind of be over that. So Kelly still may be at some meetings. She's still probably going to help us sometimes put presentations together. Right now, she's still working on our newsletter, but she is going to not necessarily be a technical support person here at the state for any of our 21st century, like a direct contact for any of our 21st century programs. We also have Nia Marshall, who is our administrative assistant. And so sometimes you may get emails from her about 21st Century. She also often sends out emails for other federal program emails as well right now. So you might see some things from her. And then we currently have three regional technical assistants. These are retired state employees that help us go out to the sites and just kind of check to make sure that the things that we're supposed to do, that the federal guidelines say that we have to do, are being done. We believe, it's not positive, hopefully I'll know by Mega next week, but we believe we're going to get a fourth one added to our team soon. But those are Joseph Dyer, Kim Hendon, and Adrian Dennis. And then once I know for sure, we will let you know who that fourth person is going to be. But they are your kind of go-tos if you have questions about things, about the program, especially any kind of technical questions. One of the things that we will talk about at Mega with some of you, some of the federal program directors at least, well, actually, we need to talk about it with our site coordinators as well, but we'll talk about kind of who you go to answer certain questions, and keeping in mind just kind of making sure that you kind of follow that chain of command as to who you go to with questions and if you need help with your programs. We also usually have a partnership. Well, we do have a partnership that is very brand new. It hasn't. Technically it started on July 1st, but they're still in the process of hiring people. But we have a partnership with the University of South Alabama, and they are going to be helping us. They're going to be providing us with some additional regional they're not going to be called TAs, they're going to be called coaches. They're going to be regional coaches that are going to really focus more on coming out and helping you guys with your programming, helping you come up with ideas of activities you can do in the afternoons. And they're really going to be more of that coaching type support. But that's going to take us a little time because, again, they're still hiring people. We're going to have to get some people trained. So that's still a work in progress, but it is coming. It took us forever to get their contract through and signed, and that has been done finally. And so once they've been able to hire some staff, we will get them out, and you'll meet them as well. All right, so I already put a link in the chat where you can sign in, but here is also a QR code that you can use to sign in. So just to let you know, with these meetings, because they are mandatory and because the feds actually require that we have these meetings, we have to be careful. We have to make sure everyone attends them. And so we will ask you to scan this QR code or the link at the beginning of most meetings and at the end of meetings to show that you were here for the entire meeting, or to show when you scanned in and out. Now, if you're not able to attend all these meetings in person, we prefer for you to attend in person because we want you to be able to ask questions if possible. But if you're not able to attend, we are recording this. As you know, we have 2 of these sessions. We will pick whichever one went the best and put it on our YouTube channel. And then this is not set in stone yet, but we are looking at kind of ways for those who are taking the training and not doing it in person to have like a little Google quiz or something that goes along with that training, just to make sure that people actually did watch it and paid attention and understood what they saw. So we're still in the works of developing that, but for now, just we're doing the QR codes. We may not have the videos, the video trainings available until after Mega, because we're right here in the full swing of getting ready for Mega. And that's another one of my duties, is I help run the Mega conference. And so that's another thing, and Kelly helps with that as well. That's another thing that takes up a lot of our time at this time of the year. So that just gave you a bunch of information that you probably didn't care about, but just to let you know kind of what is going on right now. To be honest with you, I have had people in my office all morning. I haven't even had a chance to check the email to see if that memo has been released yet, but I was told by the superintendent secretary yesterday evening that it will be this morning. They were just waiting on one thing from accounting. And so if it hasn't come out yet, it should come out any minute now. And, I'm sorry that we had to kind of push back these trainings, and we understand that some of you may still be in the process of hiring people. We also understand that some LEAs may have not wanted to hire anyone until that official memo went out, even though we encouraged them to go ahead and do that. And that's fine. We had a meeting yesterday to discuss this because, school starts very, very soon. And if today is the first day that you are trying to hire people for your programs, you may not be ready for your program to start on the first full week of school like you were supposed to. Again, this is a federal requirement that programs start at the beginning of the school year and last the entire year, because they want, the 21st century has a lot of functions. It's great for many things, but one of the things it's great for that the feds do care about is providing a safe place for students to be after school, and to give parents that ability to have a safe place for their students to be if they're still working and things like that. And so they want to make sure that those programs are established as early in the year as possible, and that they last the entire year, for the sake of parents. So after our discussion yesterday, we have decided that we will allow programs because the RFA, well, not the RFA, I'm sorry, because the memo announcing who got the grant is being released later than we anticipated and later than we tried our hardest to have happen. Because of that, we're going to say that all programs need to start the week after Labor Day. So I believe that's September 10th. Is that correct, Melissa and Carla?
The 8th.
I'm sorry, the 8th?
September
Okay.
8th.
Okay. I apologize I didn't have this on the slide, but we just discussed this yesterday. And again, things have been crazy since then. So, but yes, we encourage you to start the program as fast as you possibly can. But we are going to give some flexibility and say that you don't have to necessarily start your programs until September 8th. Okay, and hopefully that will give you enough time to get these trainings done, get people hired, do some recruiting of students, and get everything you need to get your program started. All right, today's agenda, we're going to be talking about the RFA itself, certain parts of the RFA. We're going to talk about statutory and federal regulations. We're going to talk about the funding, the required deliverables for the funding. In other words, what do you have to maintain to keep your funding? We're going to talk about the assurances that your superintendent agreed to, and your program environment and operations. So we're going to talk a little bit about facility requirements, safety, transportation, hours of operation, summer program requirements, that sort of thing. All right, so we're going to start off with just the RFA itself. If you need access to this, we do have a 21st Century State website. It is a Google website. It is different than the website that we had a couple of years ago that was ran through TPI, our former partners. When that partnership dissolved, we had to create a new website, and the state had us do that through our state Google website. It is still kind of in the works of being developed. Kelly has been working on that. She's done a great job with it. But if you see that something is missing that you need, please let us know, and we'll make sure we can get it uploaded to the website, because we had to take years worth of things off of an old website and then kind of sift through those and figure out what needed to be added to the new website, because there was a lot of old information on the old one that to me was a little confusing, and we didn't want to do that again. So we just kind of want to make sure we put on the website things that you need. But one of the things that you do need, of course, is the RFA. So, and that's what is in this RFA is kind of your rules and regulations that you go by as you run your programs. Every cohort has a different RFA, and each year the rules change slightly, for each cohort. Things changed quite a bit for cohort 26 because it was the first year that our team had been over developing the RFA. But between 26 and 27, there's not much difference between the two RFAs other than the way that they're laid out. They're laid out differently, but they really have pretty much the same basic information in them. But we highly encourage all administrators to go in and read the RFA and make sure that you understand kind of the rules and regulations. Of course, it does talk about what you have to have in the application, but a lot of what it talks about is the requirements of the program itself. All right, so again, hopefully the memo will go out today announcing who got the 27 awards, the Cohort 27 awards. This is a 4-year competitive grant. So 26 was 5 years. This one is 4 years. We're trying to kind of get us on a cycle where we can do like one large competition every 5 years. Now, not saying that we won't have another competition for another 5 years. We may have some smaller competitions in between those times, depending on the amount of funding that's available. I haven't checked to see. I know that there was a big bill in Congress about possibly drastically increasing the amount of funding for 21st Century. So I haven't seen if that's come out yet. But of course, if that actually does occur and is passed, then we will be having another grant competition. Kind of makes me want to cry a little bit, but we'll have another grant competition because we'll be getting a lot more money for our state, I'm sure. So we'll see. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. All right. So for this award, we had 4 new subgrantees. And that would be Elba City, Greene County, Marengo County, and Montgomery County. So let me just explain this for anybody. And I'm sorry, some of you have been doing this for years. So I'm just, preaching to the choir, but I'm going to talk as though you know nothing about this, about 21st century. So please forgive me. But just to let you know, we have subgrantees and we have sites, okay? The subgrantee is either your LEA or your organization if you're a CBO. CBO stands for community-based organization. Some CBOs are faith-based, some are just regular organizations, nonprofit organizations, okay? So as far as subgrantees, usually most of them are LEAs that have applied for the grant. And then under that subgrant, and we call it a subgrantee. In the past, it was called a grantee, but that's technically not correct because this is a competitive grant, the state of Alabama is actually the grantee. The feds award the state a lump sum of money, and then we are supposed to subgrant that out, do a competition and subgrant that money out. So technically, you guys are subgrantees. And so we have 4 new ones, and then we have 16 that had either a cohort 17 or a 26 grant for at least one site. So most of you have been doing this a while, or you're already familiar with the program. We have a total of 44 sites that were awarded a grant this cohort. 12 of them are new. 5 of them had a cohort 16 grant. 27 currently have a cohort 17 grant. So you're just kind of rolling over into the new program. And the grants this year range anywhere from 122,400 up to 370,000. So this year, the maximum amount of money that could be awarded was the 370. It was 350,000 for your programming, and then you could also get an additional $20,000 if you were a rural LEA, or if you were serving rural schools, and we're planning to provide transportation to those students home either during the school year or transportation during the summer for those students. So that is our grant range. Now, one thing you definitely need to be aware of is that our funding was awarded based on student attendance and program hours. And so it is important that you maintain the student attendance and program hours that you said you were going to when the grant was written. So keep in mind, we understand that many people that are watching this did not write your grant or did not write your RFA. So one of the things that we will be doing at Mega next week is having you guys go through your own RFA very closely. But you need to be aware that that when the application was completed, whoever wrote your application said that you would plan to serve a certain number of students, okay? And that you were going to serve those students for a certain number of program hours. So what we do is we take those 2 numbers and then multiply them by each other and then multiply that number by 6 to get the eligible award for that site up to $350,000. Okay, so again, it's the number of participants served times the number of program hours times $6, and that gave us the eligible award. Where did $6 come from? To be honest with you, we just took some numbers. We looked at other states that were doing something similar, and just kind of played with the numbers until we got a good number that would give sites plenty of money to do what they needed to do, and I still have enough money to try to award as many grants as possible. In the past, we just kind of gave a 200,000. I think the 200,000 was the max, and pretty much you just got what you asked for. You didn't have to have any reasoning behind it. And the bad situation with that is that some sites, like the small sites, had plenty of money to operate, but some of our larger sites were really struggling to have enough money to operate. So you've got some really small sites that are just serving a handful of, not handful, but like 30 to 50 students that had an overabundance of money each year, and weren't spending all their funds. And then we had some sites that took that 200,000, and it just wasn't enough. They had to turn students away, and they were bare bones minimum on their staffing and the things that they could purchase for their sites. And so that's why we went to this whole funding calculation. Now, sorry. So, we do keep in mind, though, that anybody could say, oh, we're going to serve 300 kids and for 720 hours and get just a ton of money. So we did have a limit to it, and we did look at it and see if the number was feasible based on the size of the school and things like that. I think there was like maybe 1 or 2 sites that we ended up adjusting the number of the award a little bit because the hours of the program really didn't match up with the total number of hours for the year. Anyway, I'm digressing, sorry. But just keep in mind that for all 4 years of the grant, your goal is to try to meet those numbers, okay? So you definitely should be able to meet your program hour numbers, because if you say you're going to run your program from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. each day, Monday through Friday, that's, you can, and we consider a full year 36 weeks, okay? So if you say you're going to run that program, 10 hours a week for 36 weeks, your program hours are 360. That's pretty set in stone. That's usually not an issue. Now, every now and then we have where people overcommitted. They said, oh, we're going to run our program until 6 p.m. or 6:30 or something like that. They said they're going to run their program maybe 3 hours a day. But then when it comes time to actually hire staff and things like that, they have a hard time finding anyone that wants to commit to staying in the afternoon for that long. And so they decide to cut the hours, still staying within the required number of hours, but cut it to lower than what their funding was based off of. If that happens, then we will cut the funding for that program year to the number of hours that you're actually serving students, okay? So again, typically that doesn't happen. Typically, you know what your program hours are going to be. They're pretty set in stone, and usually there's not a fluctuation in that. But sometimes the attendance is the thing that's a little bit difficult. We ask you to kind of guess or provide a very good estimate of how many students that you can serve, but sometimes that number is higher than reality. Okay, maybe you have big lofty goals and you say you can serve 100 students, but then no matter what you do, no matter what you try to offer over a time period, you just can't get 100 kids to sign up and actually participate in the program. So we understand that could be a potential issue. So here's how that will work, okay? So in year 1 of the program, which will be this year, we are not going to necessarily insist that you maintain a certain percentage of the attendance that you said you were going to, okay? So let's say, I'm just going to keep using 100 because that's a big round number, or a good round number. Let's say you said you're going to serve 100 students, but at the end of the year, you're really only serving 25 or 50, okay? For year 1, we're going to allow that to continue. However, we're going to be mindful of that and try our best to help you come up with some ideas of ways that you can get more students to participate in your program. Okay. We've got some trainings that we are planning to have this coming year to kind of help with that, to kind of give you some ideas. But at the end of year 2, if you have not met at least 75% of the number of students that you said you were going to serve in your grant, then in the following year, for year 3, we will cut your total program funding to the number of students that you are actually serving. So let's say that at the end of year 2, you said you're going to serve 100, but at the end of the year 2, you're only serving 60 kids, and you haven't been able to get the number above that. Then for year 3, we're going to redo our calculation to figure out what your grant amount needs to be to serve 60 students for that number of program hours. And then that will be your grant amount for year 3, okay? For years at the end of year 3, we expect you to be maintaining at least 85%. So let's say in year 2, you said you're going to serve 100. In year 2, you're serving 76. You're doing great, right? And so you maintain your funding. Then in year 3, we expect you to maintain 85% of your funding. So we expect you to be serving 85 kids by the end of year 3. If not, again, we will revisit the funding calculation and adjust your funding for that final year of your program in year 4. Okay, and I'm sorry this says years 3, 4, and 5. Let me get that off of there really quick, because evidently I copied and pasted that from Cohort 26. So they were a 5-year grant. Okay. There, fixed. All right. So again, if your attendance falls below those percentages, the award amount for the following year will be cut. Going back to the program hours though, sorry, I'm having a hard time getting my mouse to work. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. I apologize. So let's talk, before we talk about hours, let's talk about what we consider a regularly attending participant. All right. We initially had planned to just kind of use your daily average attendance, but we realized that that wasn't fair to some of our secondary schools, because oftentimes they have students that participate at certain points of the year, but not all year long because of things like sports or jobs or things like that. And so what we decided, we looked at what some other states were doing. I spent hours looking at federal regulations to see if I could find somewhere in writing where it said what a regularly attending participant would be considered to be. And I did find something. I found something in some old federal guidelines that talked about what was considered a regularly attending student. And they said 15% of program hours offered. So again, if a student participates in at least 15% of the program hours that are being offered at that site, then they can be considered regularly attending, okay, which is great. So for example, if your program is a 300-hour per school year program, any student who attends at least 45 hours of programming, which would be 15% of 300, we will count that student as part of your attendance count when we are looking at your funding. Okay, so hopefully that way it's fair across the board to everyone. If you have students that only participate during one semester of the school year, they still should be able to get those 45 hours of participation in order for it to help count towards your overall total number of participating students. Okay. If anyone have any questions about that, if anytime, please feel free to put a question in the chat. I can't see everyone. So I don't know if raising your hand will help, but definitely you're welcome to put something in the chat, or maybe Carla or Melissa can let me know if someone's raising their hand or something. But I will just keep going unless you guys have a question about that. All right. I wanted to point out that we did this separately for the academic year and the summer. Okay, so there was actually 2 different funding calculations that we did. The reason why we did that is because often programs have a lot more students that participate during the summer than during the school year, and we wanted to try again to be as fair as possible. So we calculate those 2 separately. So we look at the number of students who are participating in the summer times the number of summer program hours times 6 to figure out the amount of money for the summer programming. And then we do the same thing for the academic year. Okay, so the same situation will apply when you figure out regularly attending. So you won't be able to like add those 2 numbers together to figure out regularly attending students for the whole year. We'll look specifically at the kids who participated during the summer and who participated at least 15% of the summer program hours that were offered for that summer calculation. Okay. Again, trying to make it as fair as possible for everyone, because, some sites don't even do a summer program. And so we just, again, trying to make it very fair. but you don't necessarily have to worry about this in this first year. I highly do recommend, though, if you see that you're struggling to have students sign up, reach out to your specialists, reach out to your TAs, hopefully soon reach out to your coaches, and we can try to help you come up with some ideas, some outside the box ideas to get students to sign up. Especially those older kids, the middle school and the high school tend to be the ones that are the most difficult to get to participate. But there's things you can do to get kids to participate. And one of the future trainings we'll talk about that. We'll give you some ideas of some things that you could add to your programming that might be helpful. But yes, think outside the box. Just because you didn't write it in your RFA, you do have to stick to your RFA. You have to stick to what you said you were going to do in your application, but you can go above and beyond that. So as you see that there is an interest in your school for specific things, like for example, this was several years ago, but at my daughter's school, she's going to college this coming fall, so this is back in junior high. But when she was in junior high, the big thing was and my mind just went completely blank. The Asian
Esports.
drawings, huh?
Esports?
No, I love esports too. She would have loved that. She would have loved esports. But it was a club. It was the drawing why am I drawing a blank? You know, where they draw like the Asian cartoons. Anyway. Anime. Thank you. Gosh, I love it when my brain stops working. So anime, it was like an anime club. And they had so many kids that wanted to join this club, they couldn't fit them all in, and there was like a waiting list. And so that's the kind of thing that you could add to your afternoon program that would make kids want to come to it, you know, if you're offering activities that they're really into, and they'll be excited to come to it. And then once they come to that and get the fun activities, they're also hopefully getting a little bit of learning and a little bit of remediation or a little bit of help with their homework, in addition to that fun stuff that they get to do in the afternoon programs. All right. Okay, so I was thinking I had a slide about talking about the years. I guess that was at the beginning, but I just want to reiterate. I'm sorry, hours. I want to reiterate that if you don't meet your program hours, then if you adjust your program hours going into this new year different than what you said it was going to be on your RFA, we will go ahead and reduce the funding for this year. Okay, we'll do it in the current year because, you know, it's not like a situation where you didn't know that the hours were going to be reduced. You did that intentionally and reduce the hours. Now, for those of you who don't start your program until after Labor Day, if you choose to do that, we won't penalize you for that. We won't cut your hours based on that. But just understand that this is a one-time thing only, and next year you would be expected to start your program the first full week of school. And what we mean by the first full week is, you know, a lot of schools will start like on a Thursday. They'll go Thursday and Friday, and then they'll pick up a full week the next week. That's what we mean, is that you don't have to do your program that first Thursday and Friday. You can wait until the following Monday to actually kick off your 21st century program if you want to in a typical year. All right. I've already kind of mentioned this, but some sites were awarded additional funds for transportation. Urban sites could apply for up to $10,000 and rural sites could apply for up to $20,000. And so if you were awarded those funds, then you are supposed to provide transportation either during your academic year or the summer or both. Okay, you could do it either way. So if it's academic year, then you've said you're going to take students home from the program in the afternoon. And if it's during the summer, then it may be that you're picking kids up from their homes and taking them home in the afternoon, or just one or the other. But you need to be providing that if you were awarded the funds, okay? Now, if for whatever, if you're doing what you said you were going to do in your plan and you don't spend all of the transportation funds, then the remaining funds can just be used for other allowable activities. Another thing I want to mention too is that I know I said a minute ago that we calculate your academic year and your summer programming separately. But once you've been awarded that money, it's just in one big pot and you can spend it how you need to. So you don't have to stick with a certain amount for the summer and a certain amount for the academic year. You can use part of your academic year for the summer, or vice versa. So I just want to point that out as well, because that's come up in the past, is people were under the impression that because we calculated them separately, that they had to spend those specific amounts during those time periods, and that's not the case. Okay. Now, if you said you were going to provide transportation, this happened to one of our sites this past year. They fully were on board with providing transportation, but then when it actually came down to it, they were an urban site, and when it came down to it, it was costing them a ton of money, way more than the $20,000 extra money that we gave them. And they spent that and went way above that, and decided that they could no longer, they no longer wanted, it was no longer feasible for them to continue to provide that transportation. So they reached out to the State Department to get permission, which is what you would need to do. They did the exact right thing they were supposed to. They explained the situation, and literally they were spending like $60,000 to $80,000 on transportation, taking kids home in the afternoons because they were so rural. And they just said, this is killing us. Can we, we said we were going to provide it in our grant, but can we back out of that? And so, of course, we gave them permission to stop providing that transportation. That does mean that in next year, when they get their funding amount, it will be reduced by that $20,000 that they were given for transportation, because they decided they're no longer going to provide it. So their grant for the next year will be reduced by that $20,000. Okay. Keep in mind that you get the grant on a yearly basis. So yes, this is a 4-year grant, but each year is awarded one year at a time. And so every year you will have to do a continuation application. It is non-competitive. So it's, you only have to do the competitive application the first year. And then once you've got the grant, then you just have to do a continuation application. We do, based off of the federal guidelines and them really pushing, is they are really wanting us as a state agency to be checking to make sure that you are actually making progress towards your goals and objectives, that you're submitting all of the data that you're supposed to submit, which we're going to go over. You're maintaining sufficient financial systems. You're turning in your ES2s, which are your expenditure reports, in a timely manner. They want us to look at all of those things before we give a continuation award. If subgrantees are not doing what the guidelines say they have to do, they have told us they want us to cut the funding. Okay, because it is a competitive grant, and they feel that that if you say you're going to do something, that you should do it. And if you're not meeting those goals and expectations, and the program is not benefiting the students, then the funding needs to be cut so that it can be given to another site, or given to, be put into another competition and be awarded to someone else. Okay, so please keep that in mind, that year to year, please make sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, so that we don't have any issues giving you your next year's award. Okay, so the one main thing that was different between the Cohort 26 and the Cohort 27 RFA is carryover. Okay, another thing that the feds have encouraged us to do is to not allow carryover. Really, the way that they've put it is that if funds are not spent in a year, they really want us to not necessarily not allow carryover, but reduce the next year's funds by that amount that was carried over, which is basically the same thing. And that's what we put in the RFA for Cohort 26. The issue, though, is that a lot of times your expenditures for the previous year are not due to be submitted and completely submitted until mid-December. By mid-December, we've already granted you the next awards funds right? And so it's really hard at that point to come back and say, by the way, we're reducing your grant by $100,000 because you didn't spend all your funds last year. So in the cohort, in the FY27, in your RFA, it does say that there will not be any carryover allowed. So you will spend your funds, and then whatever remains at the end will go back into the pot, the general pot of money that will go towards, our next grant competition, or will go towards, it could be we might do supplemental grants in the future, but it will not be carried over from one year to the next. Okay. Very likely we're going to do the same thing for 26. We just have to put it in writing. I've already reached out to the feds. They have already approved. I just need to actually get approval from Dr. Killingsworth that we may do the same thing for cohort 26. Just say no more carryover in this fiscal year because it's just not feasible to pull funds from you in the middle of the school year. I mean, we could do that, but to me that doesn't seem. I would rather just, up front what that you're not going to get those funds rolled over. Any questions about that? All right, moving on. Okay, so the next part is going to be a little boring, but we're going to talk about the actual regulations and requirements from the feds. But it's very interesting. Hopefully, I'll try to make it as interesting as I can. But you do need to know these things because you need to know why we ask you guys to do certain things that we do. When I took this job, one of my goals was to try to make things easier on people, and I don't think I've actually done that. I've tried my hardest. I think in some ways I've made things easier, but in some ways I've made things harder just because I saw that we weren't necessarily doing all of the things that the feds require us to be doing. And so, these funds do come with a lot of work, and I'm so sorry. We try to reduce that work whenever we see a chance to do so, but there's certain things that we just can't avoid because it's in the federal regulations. Okay. One thing here is academic focus. It is very important that you understand that, yes, 21st century is about providing a safe, fun place for kids to go after school, but the feds and the state department wants your after school program to be more focused on academics and improving academic performance in your students. Okay. So yes, we are all about, you can do some great fun things with the kids, but we also need you to make sure that you are including academic activities and not just homework help, like actual hands-on academic fun, take what they learned during the school day and do something fun with it in the afternoon where they get a hands-on experience type activities. Okay. Because really the purpose of 21st century is to increase academic achievement. It's not just to give kids and parents a safe place for students to be after school. All right. All 21st century programs must be provided outside of the regular school day or during periods when school is not in session. Okay, so you can have a program before school, after school, evenings, weekends, holidays, summers. I even saw another state, if you remember the flooding that occurred, I think it was like South Carolina a few years ago, where they had to shut several schools down. But they had safe, community centers that kids could go to. They were able to actually continue to run their 21st century program, even though school was shut down. They were able to use their 21st century funds to run a program in that community center to give those kids a safe place to be during what would typically be the school day, while their parents were trying to sort out their situation with their homes being flooded and all of that. So anytime a school is not in session is when your 21st century program can run. Okay. Now, the one exception to that is that you can use your 21st century funds to provide activities to adult family members of the students that you serve. Okay. And if you are doing that, which we had several sites say that they were going to do that in their RFAs and their applications, then you can actually offer those activities during school hours if you choose to, because those are being provided to adults who aren't in school anymore. And you would need to provide that activity at a time that's most convenient for them. And so, You might wonder, what kind of activity do I provide? And we'll spend more time on this in a future presentation, but it's things like you might provide help with passing the ACT or getting their diploma, or parenting skills, or reading, helping your student, learning how to help your student read, or things like that, or, any kind of activity. It just really depends on what the needs of your community are, but you can provide things for the adult family members of those students. Now, you can't just provide them to any adult in the community. That usually comes up, a question about that usually comes up. It does have to be, the federal regulations does say it has to be a family member of one of the students that's participating in your 21st century program, okay? All right, the next thing is you're supposed to provide equitable services for private schools. So you must send an intent to apply form to all nonprofit, private elementary and secondary schools that are in the attendance area of the schools that you're serving, okay? Those of you who are from LEAs know that, or at least if you work with federal programs, you know that that is something that we do for all title programs. You're supposed to send out an intent to apply. So the same one that is sent out for like Title I, Title II, Title III, you can just add your 21st century program to that form and have it sent out as well, okay? But you do have to offer programming to the private schools that are within the attendance area of the schools that you're serving, okay? So it's based on location of the school. If you have a private school that is within the attendance area of that school, you have to reach out to them and send them that intent to participate form. If you don't have that form, like if you're a CBO, then just let us know and we will get you a copy of that you can send out to those private schools. Okay. And then if you do have a private school that's interested, then you do have to allow those private school students to participate, all right? It has to be equitable. So whatever you, so you can't just say, we'll allow you to participate if there's room for you. You can't do it that way. So like, for example, if you put out an application to your public school students to participate in the 21st century program, you need to make that same application accessible to those private school students at the same time on the same day, and they need to be considered in the same way that you would consider your public school applicants, okay? And this, sometimes it's not a problem. Sometimes you want more people to participate, but we do have some sites that serve a large number of kids and actually have a waiting list. And so you can't, if that's your case, if you are going to have a ton of kids that are interested in participating, you can't put your public school kids above the private school. That would be against some major federal laws. So you have to provide them with equal opportunity to do that. Now, as far as what always comes up is about transportation. What, do we have to transport the kids from the private school to our after school program? The answer to that is no, you don't, not necessarily. Now, if it's a summer and you are providing if you are providing transportation to your students in the summer, like you're picking them up from their homes, then it would be expected that you offer the same thing to those students. But if those students don't live like on one of your typical bus routes, you are allowed to just say, this is the place that you would have to bring your student for us to pick them up at. Like you could have a meeting place for those private school students to be brought to for you to pick them up, like a special bus stop for them or something of that nature. So if that is part of your situation, just let us know and we will help you work through that. Also, technically, if you have a homeschool parents that reach out and ask if their students can participate, you're supposed to let them participate as well. So if you have that situation, just please reach out to your ALSDE specialist. We will let you know who your ALSDE specialist is next week at Mega. But and those of you, if you're not able to attend Mega, we'll make sure we get that to you in email. But just reach out to them and we can help you work through that, because it does create some issues in our data reporting systems as far as, those students not having a student number and things like that. But we can help you work through that if you end up having that as a situation. I personally wouldn't necessarily advertise that you offer to homeschool students, but if a lot of homeschool parents are, they stay knowledgeable about things like this and they know that you're supposed to help them. So if they reach out to you, then you are supposed to allow their students to participate. All right. I'm just going to keep moving on until I have a question. So hopefully everybody's doing good. Nobody's fallen asleep yet. All right. This is just the, this is pulled straight from the guidance. And it's basically talking about that you really need to make sure that you are familiar with the 21st century statute, which is located in sections 4201 through 4206 of ESA, or ESEA, I'm sorry. And then also you can find these federal regulations on the Code of Federal Regulations website. We will make sure that we post this presentation, by the way, so that these are links in here so that you're welcome to go click on those links and go to these different websites to read these regulations and rules that apply to your 21st century program. I'm going to go over some of them today, but we highly recommend everybody who is an administrator to look at these rules and regulations, because that's basically what all of these things that we ask you to do here at the state. We're not doing it just to be mean. We're doing it because it's usually, most of the time, it's because it's a federal regulation. All right, these are some of those federal regulations. I'm not going to read this to you. This is just kind of a quick summary of what each one is. 2 CFR Part 200 is going to talk about procurement and your funding regulations and things like that that apply to all federal programs, whether it's 21st century or Title I or your child nutrition program. And then there's some other ones here that just talk about state administered programs. So keep in mind that because this is a grant, a state administered competitive grant, the rules for this grant are often different than the rules for like Title I and Title II when it comes to certain federal regulations, because just because it is a state, because it's a grant and not a not, I'm trying to think of the exact terminology. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank again. It's not an award similar. It's not an award that is provided similar to the way that Title I or Title II is provided, just to put it in simple terms. Okay, so again, you can click on these and read them yourselves. I'm not going to read this to you. But what I am going to suggest, even better than going and reading those, is the next few slides is slides from a presentation from Tiffany Kessler, who works with the Bruman Group. For those of you who are not familiar with her or familiar with Bruman, Bruman is a law firm that specializes in federal programming. They know all the rules and regulations when it comes to federal programs, and they're actually like, if you get in trouble with the feds, they're someone you would hire to come help you. But we hired them here at the State Department to go through all of our, programs and just make sure that we were, as a state, we were following all the rules and regulations that we were supposed to be, and they helped us tremendously. So we had a contract with them, and during that contract period of time, they often came into presentations, and this is one of the presentations that was done. You can actually watch a recording of the presentation by clicking on this link. We're not going to do that together today, but I highly recommend you go watch it in the future. Tiffany is super funny, super knowledgeable. I enjoy it every time I watch one of her presentations. I learn something every time I watch one of her presentations. And so if you need whether you're new or you just need a refresher, this is a great video to watch that takes you through those rules and regulations that pretty much apply to all federal programs, including 21st century. Okay, but I'm going to focus on some of the slides. I also have her slide deck, and I'm going to focus on some of her slides from the presentation and how they apply to 21st century. So that's why the next several slides, this is her material, so I didn't want to change it, but that's why they're going to look different from my other boring blue ALSDE slide. All right, so in that presentation, she talks about just overview of federal programs, the hierarchy of federal laws. She talks about Edgar. grant management systems, and documentation. Okay. Anything that's highlighted in yellow is something I added to the slide. So this is just my little fine print that says that these slides were developed by the Bremen Group, but I did add some things to it, but I highlighted those things in yellow. All right. So she's really funny about adding these cute little memes. I'm not going to go through that, but all right. So EDGAR, let's talk about that. So EDGAR is the education. EDGAR stands for the Education Department General Administrative Regulations. Okay. It talks about various grant management rules that apply to U.S. Department of Education grants. All right. Doesn't apply to CMP. So keep that in mind. My husband works for CMP for the state, and he complains all the time that when an LEA usually gets confused, is because they quote EDGAR, and EDGAR does not apply to CMP. So I'm just throwing that out there as a shout out for him. But we also have the Uniform Grant Guidance, and that does apply. Those are our federal grants management rules, talking about kind of the financial management that apply to all awards issued by federal awarding agencies. And so EDGAR incorporated the UGG back in 2014. So many of the decisions that we make with 21st Century are due to EDGAR or the UGG. Here's some common acronyms that you should be familiar with, or you might want to get familiar with. So again, let's see, what all our regulations are based off of ESEA and ESSA. Okay. Other ones that apply to us, GAN, the Grant Award Notice, we will send those out to you at some point soon. We have an issue with our GANs. Our program, those are sent out by accounting, but we will try to get those out as soon as possible. Pass-through entity, us at the State Department, and for this particular grant, is considered the pass-through entity because the grant actually comes to us and then we pass it to you. We subgrant it out to you. SAM, a system for award management. Everyone, there's a website called sam.gov that you can go to. If you get a federal award, you're actually supposed to register in sam.gov. Your LEA probably will handle that for you. Okay, so moving on. Some definitions. Again, I'm just going to focus on these down here. Recipient. For us, we call it the grantee. That would be the ALSDE. That's the entity that received the award directly from the federal awarding agency. So that's us. And then the subrecipient or subgrantee would be you guys. That's the LEA or the CBO that we sub-award the grants out to through us being the pass-through entity. All right. So keep in mind, there is a hierarchy of federal laws. You've got federal laws, different types of federal laws, and then you have state laws, and they have a hierarchy to them because sometimes they conflict with each other. And so which one do you go with? If you're not sure, if there's all these different laws that all say something different, then which one are you supposed to go with? Okay. So here's kind of the rules of that. So you've got your program statutes and regulations from the Elementary and Secondary Act. So that would be like Title I regulations. You've got the Individuals with Disabilities Act, the Carl Perkins Career Tech funding. So those would be considered, those all have their own program statutes and regulations that fall underneath them because they're specific programs. 21st Century has its own specific program statutes and regulations, okay? Then there's just education regulations that go to any kind of educational award or grant, and those would follow basically under EDGAR, okay? There's also OMB, Uniform Grants Guidance. That's the 2 CFR Part 200. That applies to all education programs. And then you have your Alabama laws and regulations. There's the ALSDE rules and requirements, and you have US Ed guidance. So when you've got all these different guidances that sometimes conflict with each other, well, how do you know which one to go with, right? All right, so just kind of letting you know that all these rules are published published daily in the Federal Register, and there's a link here to that. Okay. So let's talk about what this code means. 2 CFR, and sometimes I will send, if not necessarily if you're doing something wrong, but sometimes if I need to send you something and say, hey, we need you to do this way because of this regulation, we'll send you the code, okay? So 2 CFR 200.1, the 2 is just the title. So that's the grant and agreement. CFR stands for Code of Federal Regulations. The 200 is the Uniform Administrative Requirements, cost principles, audit requirements. So that's all those financial requirements of all education grants. And the 1 is the section number. Okay. All right. Okay, so for 21st century, so again, you've got education department rules under EDGAR, which is your 34 CFR part 74 through 99. You've got your uniform grant guidance, which is your 2 CFR part 200. And then we've got program regulations that fall under ESEA. And 21st century has to follow all of them. Plus, we have our own state and local laws and regulations that have to be followed as well. All right. So here is the hierarchy. When in doubt, you're supposed to follow the most restrictive rule, okay? So you've got program statutes, program regulations, your uniform guidance, your state laws, your local laws, your guidance documents. You follow whichever one is the most restrictive. So for example, I'm probably going to say this all wrong, but for example, our amount in the state of Alabama that what we consider an amount for certain purchases to be made. I think I'm probably going to get to that in just a moment, or maybe that's in another presentation. I'm sorry, but our amount is way, our maximum, what we consider a small purchase is different than what the feds consider. It's a much smaller number. So in other words, if you're purchasing items from a company and that purchase is I think it's 40,000, but that may be wrong. I'm sorry. I should have gone and looked at all of this before I did this presentation today to refresh my own self. But if you go over a certain amount, then you have to bid it out. And our amount here at the state of Alabama is lower than the amount that the feds say for that same type of purchase. And so you would go with what the Alabama law says because it is the most restrictive. All right. Okay, let's focus specifically on EDGAR. This is your 34 CFR, or Title 34. You've got your direct grant programs, which is not what we are. That would be your Title 1. You've got Part 76, which talks about your state administered programs that would apply to us. The definitions apply to us. Okay, if you need to go check these out, those are the things that would apply to our program, 21st century. All right, then you've got your 2 CFR. Again, I'm not going to go through all these because Tiffany does a much better job of going through all of them in her in the video that we've given you, that we'll be giving you the link to, and be sending out of all the different parts of the uniform grant guidance. Okay. But I am going to touch base back on some of Tiffany's slides as we move forward in our other slides that we're going to do. We'll refer back to some of Tiffany's other slides. We're just going to kind of tackle them as we get to them in our series of presentations, okay? All right. This is just a little disclaimer from Tiffany, basically from Brewman, saying that this does not constitute legal advice, blah, blah, blah. All right. So again, highly recommend that you go back and watch Tiffany's video. And again, we are going to touch base on some more of her slides coming up. All right. Next thing we're going to talk about is the federal certifications and assurances. So when the application was submitted, these assurances were agreed to by your superintendent, or if you're a CBO, it was agreed to by your CSFO. Both in writing, so they had to sign something in writing that had to be submitted as an attachment, but also in the process of submitting the EGAP application, our EGAP as our grants management system that we use. As part of submitting the application, they have to agree to the assurances. So let's go through those so that everybody knows what they have agreed to, and so nobody will break any of these rules. All right. So let's talk about these. Well, first we're going to go over the certifications, okay? And a lot of these are required by the feds for us to have in the application and for you to agree to as either a certification or an assurance, okay? So, and I'm just going to touch on the high points, all right? I'm not going to read this to you, but you have ensured proper planning, management, and completion of the project. So of your 21st century program, you're assuring that you are going to stick to the rules and regulations, that you're going to use appropriate fiscal management, that sort of thing. You will establish a proper accounting system. Usually this is not an issue with LEAs, but if you're a CBO, you may need help with this. I think any CBOs that got the grant this year have had the grant in the past, so this shouldn't be an issue. But just keep in mind that is important. Having a good accountant is important, especially if you don't understand federal laws, if you're not really used to working with them. And getting those expenditure reports in a timely manner is also really, really important. So having an accounting system in place and having someone who knows how to use it is really important for your program. You need to have that accounting system that has the sufficient internal controls, a clear audit trail, written cost allocation procedures. You do have to have these written procedures. So one of the things that we ask you to do in September is a self-risk assessment. And part of that assessment is asking whether you have these specific rules and procedures in writing at your site. Again, most of you probably will, because you can use the procedures that have been laid out by your LEA. But then we have some LEAs who don't necessarily have all of their procedures in writing like they're supposed to. So it is your responsibility to make sure that your fiscal management procedures are in writing, and it is something that we are supposed to check for. You need to be able to, or be capable of distinguishing expenditures that are attributable to this grant from those that are not attributable, that's a hard word to say, to this grant, okay? Especially if you are an LEA and you're getting federal funding from multiple different title programs, you need to make sure that you're keeping your 21st century expenditures separate from your other federal expenditures, or even just your state and your local school expenditures. Make sure that you are keeping those separate and that you're able to provide that documentation if we ask for it. Okay. You are supposed to maintain adequate supporting documents for any expenditures that you have with 21st century funds. Let me go ahead and say this now. If you're a CBO, this is something that we do check on a monthly basis. We ask to see your expenditures. And the reason why we do that is because, again, CBOs tend to be less experienced with working with federal type programs. And we just issues have come up in the past where it's worked out better for us to check those on a monthly basis. Now, if we get to the point where the CBO is doing a fantastic job and we no longer need to check them, then that's fine. We will let them know, and they can we still ask them to submit it, but we may say you don't have to submit every month. Maybe you can submit them quarterly or whatever, okay? Now, LEAs, we don't typically check that. However, we have been encouraged to do so. To be honest with you, we just haven't had the time or the manpower to do that. But to make it fair and equitable, we have been encouraged to do that by like Dr. Killingsworth and the feds, to just randomly every now and then ask for documentation for your ES2s to see if you are able to back up those expenditures and if those expenditures are allowable. And so we have every right to ask for that, and we very well may do that in the future. And just to let you know, there are proposed changes to the Uniform Grant Guidance, the UGG, that may make it required for us to check these expenditures for all federal programs in the future. So that could potentially be coming down the road. But just make you aware, we're going to talk about that at Mega next week in our federal program session, all day session. But yeah, that's a potential thing that might be coming. So please understand that at any time we could reach out to you and say, hey, you just submitted an expenditure for $80,000. We need to see the receipts and documentation for those expenditures. And you should be able to provide those. Okay. Again, those need to be supported by a source document such as a receipt, travel voucher, invoice, bill, or in-kind vouchers is what you could submit to show documentation of those expenditures. All right. You've also, your superintendent has also, or your CSFO, has also said that they will comply with the Office of Management and Budget, that's OMB, the 2 CFR Part 200 Subpart E cost principles. In other words, you will maintain those principles that fall under 2 CFR Part 200 related to allowability, reasonableness, and allocability, okay, of costs. This is something that we're supposed to use across all federal programs to determine whether something is allowable or not, and whether we are supposed to fund that item with those federal funds, okay? There's a little bit more flexibility with 21st Century as to what we consider allowable. It's all about the programming and what you're offering to your students. So, for example, you would not be allowed to purchase video games and video game controllers with Title I funds. There's no way that would ever go through and be allowed. But if you have a 21st Century program and you're going to do an esports program as part of your after-school programming, then it is allowed for you to purchase gaming systems and controllers and gaming tables and that sort of thing for that specific sports program. Can you just buy one randomly to have in the 21st Century room for kids to play with? No. Okay. It needs to be tied to some sort of academic or some sort of activity that you're doing with those 21st centuries, whether it's academic or enrichment. But it is allowable as long as it is part of your regularly scheduled activities that you're providing for your students. Okay. Reasonable is another thing that we really have to take into account. One of the things I like to do is say, if this was my money, would I think that is a reasonable price for that? This is something that we are also asked to really monitor at the state level for 21st Century programming, okay? Some of you may or may not know this, but not very long ago, like a year or two ago, 21st Century funds came very close to being cut by the federal government because of reports of people spending money on things that were not necessarily educational and were not really considered reasonable, people misappropriating funds and that sort of thing. And so thank goodness the program didn't get canceled, but part of what we have been tasked with at the state level is to make sure that that what you are purchasing is reasonable and allowable and allocable. Okay, so just keep in mind that this usually often will come up, especially with vendors. Okay, at least it has in the past couple of years. When you do your application, if you're going to contract with an outside vendor to come in and work with your students, you need to pay them a reasonable amount of money for what the services are that they're providing. Okay. If you can back up that what you're providing them is reasonable, then we're all for it. But if you have someone that's coming in and let's say they're doing soccer lessons in the afternoon and they want you to pay them $400 an hour to do soccer lessons with their students, that's not reasonable. Okay, not when you could actually probably get your school coach to come do the same thing and pay them $40 an hour. Okay. Now, what if you've got a professional soccer player that's going to come and speak to the students and kick around the ball with the kids a little bit, and they're an actual professional national soccer player who goes and does speaking engagements? Would it be feasible to pay them a larger amount for them to come that day? then yes, absolutely, because, that would be reasonable. So it really just depends on the situation. But that is something that we often send applications back for, is people trying to hire outside vendors for at unreasonable amounts. So if you're not sure if the amount is reasonable, you can do a Google search. That's what we do here at the state for that activity. If you want to hire, let's say, a counselor to come and work with your students, we Google what is the going rate, hourly rate for a professional counselor that works with youth in the state of Alabama. And somewhere around that rate that, that Google tells us is what we expect you to be paying that counselor, not 4 times that amount. Okay. So just keep that in mind. It's not personal. It's just we're trying to be very good ambassadors of these funds and make sure that they're being spent in a reasonable manner. All right. Okay. We also expect you to keep personnel activity records. So anybody that you're paying with 21st Century Funds, you are supposed to keep PARs on. And in the past, the program made people turn those in on a monthly basis. We haven't been doing that. Our team has not been doing that, but it is going to be part of your compliance monitoring. It's something that you need to turn in. And then we could ask for them at any time. So keep that in mind, that you are supposed to be keeping an attendance record for anyone who's working, anybody that you're paying with 21st Century Funds. You're supposed to be keeping a log of basically like a sign-in, sign-out log that states what they did with the students during that time that they were working for 21st Century. They're actually not just supposed to sign it and verify their hours, but they're also supposed to put in that PAR what they worked on that day. So again, we haven't been checking these like religiously, but we may ask for them at any point in time, especially if we feel like you're spending way more on staff than maybe is necessary. Then we might ask to see your PARs. Just if anything just seems a little off, we might ask to see the PARs at that point. So just keep that in mind. But we definitely do ask for them during compliance monitoring. Okay. And the next bullet is that you're going to approve all expenditures, document receipt of goods and services, and record payments on the applicant's accounting records prior to submission of reimbursement claims. So that's done through an ES2. We'll go into more details about ES2s in the future, probably our next virtual training. But you are expected to have all of your documentation together and recorded before submitting your expenditures into the state for reimbursement. Oh, we have a question. All right. For compliance, do we need a monthly timesheet from our school system to accompany the PARs? We don't ask for that. No, we don't necessarily ask for that. Now, the only thing I could think of that may come up is if for some reason we end up having a concern that maybe you're paying a staff member during time when they're actually contracted to do like teaching or something like that with other funding, we may ask to see those timesheets to see, what the hours are for that teacher, what their regular paid hours are considered to be. We might ask to see it at that time, but not as just a regular everyday something that we would ask for you to submit. Great question. Why don't we all ask questions? All right. You also agree to initiate and complete the work within the applicable time frame. You will not discriminate when you're hiring, of course. These are just those regular, typical laws. You're not going to discriminate against any employees for race, color, religion, age, sex, national origin, or disability. Okay. You won't treat them any different for the same things. All right, you will comply with the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. So FERPA, be very careful about that. We had an issue. We realized that we were violating FERPA last year by not going into, we had an issue where our previous partners were telling sites that when they went in and marked a student as 21st century, that they could just leave them marked that and never have to go back in and unmark them. And so we were actually pulling data on a huge number of students that hadn't participated in a 21st century program in years. So we had to fix that. But that was a FERPA violation. So make sure that you are not doing any FERPA, not having any FERPA violations. You will have to get a unique entity identifier. You all should have that. You have to be registered in sam.gov, which is that system for award management. You do have to disclose in writing any potential conflict of interest to the ALSDE. So we do ask of this. I'm not sure that we collected these last year. I know we should have. From our administrators, we definitely collected them from our external evaluators, but we also will this year expect our administrators to also submit a conflict of interest form. And basically what that is just saying that you do not have any conflicts of interest with working in the capacity of a 21st century program, and that you understand that you are not to hire other employees for the 21st century program or a vendor that may be a conflict of interest. So a family member could potentially be a conflict of interest. Now, do keep in mind, though, that's not necessarily means that you're doing anything wrong. It's just you do need to submit that form and let us know about the conflict of interest so that we can make a decision as to whether that is okay or not. So let's go back to that example I just said. Let's say that you're in a small town and you want to do tennis lessons with the students 1 day a week, and the only person that you can find that is qualified, that maybe went to college and played tennis in college, or they compete on a regular basis or whatever, the only person that you can find to do that is a relative of yours. But you can show that you put the advertisement out there to the public, that you tried to make the position open, to the public, make people, you gave anybody in the public free opportunity to apply for the position, and just no one else applied or nobody else qualified, and that person was the best person for the job, then that would probably be fine. But you would just need to make sure that we were aware of it. And once we looked at it and saw that you did your due diligence, and you tried to see if there was other people available, and that you're paying this person a reasonable amount that is not over the top, then more than likely it will be fine, and you can move on from that. And now you're safe. You don't have to worry about in the future being accused of favoritism or whatever, hiring your own family, that kind of thing. So that's really the whole point of that conflict of interest, is just making us aware that that of any potential conflict of interest. Also keep in mind that the federal regulations also says potential, if there could be a potential conflict of interest, you need to report it. So, or a perceived conflict of interest. So if you feel like the public may be concerned about you hiring someone or bringing someone in, then we need to be aware of it so that we can look at all the facts and determine whether that is an acceptable thing for you to do or not. Okay. It really covers yourself, and just make sure that you are not at some point in the future that you don't get in trouble in the future, is you don't end up being sent to the ethics commission for some sort of ethics violation. Okay, and then the last thing is that you are supposed to disclose in writing to the ALSDE all violations of federal criminal law involving fraud, bribery, or gratuity that could potentially affect your award. So if your LEA or any of your employees has ever been convicted of a crime that involved fraud, a federal crime that involved fraud, bribery, or gratuity, then a violation of one of those that you need to put in writing and let us and report that to the ALSDE. All right, those are the certifications. Next are the assurances. All right, you have to assure that the project will take place in a safe, easily accessible facility that is conducive to an effective learning environment. one of the things that the federal regulation says, and most of the times they prefer for the program to occur in a school. We do have a couple of sites that are outside of a school. They may be at like a local community center or a church. We just need to, is it a question? Sorry. If that's the case, we may ask to either come out and view the location just to make sure. Someone has unmuted themselves. If one of my team could mute everyone back, that'd be, let's see, I don't know. I don't have the ability to do it. Or if you just make sure you're muted, that'd be great. All right. So we just want to make sure that no matter where your program is being held, that it is a safe facility and it is the best place for effective learning to take place. You are supposed to run your program in active collaboration with the schools that the students attend. One of the ways we ask you to do that is to have some form of communication with the day school teachers, between your afternoon program teachers and your day school teachers, okay? You need to know what the students are doing during the school day so that hopefully during the afternoon you can take whatever it is they're learning to the next level, or that you can provide some tutoring or some remediation for any of the students who may need it, who might be struggling in whatever topic is going on. We do ask that every site have a school liaison who is responsible for facilitating that communication between the school day teachers and the program. And we are going to be checking that more closely this year to make sure that is occurring, because that is something that the feds have really pushed that they want to see happening. You have to agree that your project will primarily target students who attend schools that are eligible for Title I, which was a requirement, so everybody should be meeting that assurance. They had to assure that the funds awarded will be used to increase the level of state, local, and other non-federal funds that would, in the absence of these funds, be used for after-school or summer programming. So in other words, not supplanting. So this is something everybody needs to be, something very important, everybody needs to be aware of, that you don't want to supplant. So let's say that, hopefully anyway, let's say that you got the 21st, that you've been, before you got this grant, you've been providing after school programming for your students at your school, okay? Now that you've gotten this grant, you can't just stop providing those activities, those after school activities to your students with those other funds. You can't replace the funds you were using with 21st century funds, because that would be considered supplanting. You can add to what you were already doing, okay? But you can't take the place of what you were already doing. That would be a big federal no-no, all right? So please make sure you understand that. Now, you may have just been providing like simple after-school tutoring, an hour a day, a few days a week or something like that. And now you're going to have like a full-fledged after-school program. That's fine. Just make sure that you are continuing to pay those original after-school tutors or someone to take their place for tutoring as part of your you're going to continue to offer that tutoring service that you offered before. Now you're just adding to that and offering additional activities, making it where you're serving those kids for longer hours, whatever the case may be. But you have to add to what was already being done. You cannot replace what was being done before. Does anyone have any questions about supplanting? Because it's one of those things that's really, it kind of throws people for a loop when they hear that sometimes, because that's very much what they intended to do. And it can get kind of confusing, especially in the summer when it comes to the summer programming, the required summer programming that's the Math and the Literacy Act summer programming. You can braid those funds together with 21st Century, but you have to be very careful about the way you do that. And so if that's something that you're interested in doing that, we will have some future sessions on braiding funds and things like that to try to help you as much as possible keep from supplanting in your programming. Okay, we have a question. Okay, So the question is, they've got the ASAP grant and they have the 21st Century grant. And both grants want them to attend ACA. It says, can one fund one person and the other fund a different person? That's a great question. Okay. So I think this is a new thing this year with ASAP, as they're funding people to go to ACA. I don't think there would be a problem with that. I will let you guys know. A lot of times things like this I have to think about a little bit longer, but I don't think that that would be considered a supplanting situation. ASAP doesn't have a supplanting requirement like 21st Century does. So it could have been an issue if it was flip-flopped, like if you've been paying for people to go to ACA with 21st Century funds and then suddenly start paying using ASAP funds, if ASAP wasn't a state grant and it had a supplanting, I can't think of the exact word, but if it had that rule tied to them, then it could be an issue. But since it doesn't, then it should be fine if you're doing it that way. So it should be fine for you to pay for those students or to accept those free attendance to ACA with ASAP funds. And then if they can't afford to pay for everyone to go, then you're welcome to use the 21st Century for the others. And if I find out different, I will let you guys know. Sometimes I have to think through things for a little while and look at some regulations to make sure I'm correct, but I'm pretty sure that that would be fine off the top of my head. All right. Okay. Any other questions about that? The planning is just one of those things that sometimes you have to really think about. And it's always good to think about, how do we pay for this last year? And how do we pay for it if 21st Century no longer existed? Because going to ACA is not like a mandatory thing for you to do, you should be fine. But if it's something that's mandatory by the state, you can't use 21st Century funds to pay for it. So like, that's why those literacy and math camps that have become like a mandatory state thing, you can't pay for those activities with 21st Century funds, but you can add additional activities to that summer camp with 21st Century funds to pay for additional things on top of the required math and literacy activities that have to be paid for with the state funds. Okay, so you just kind of have to, those are the things that you have to think about when you're determining whether you might be supplanting or not. But we're happy to try to help you walk through that. We may have to, again, think through it, but please feel free to reach out if you have a concern. All right. Next, state level program requirements. So the next things we're going to talk about is what we have determined as a state entity, as a state 21st Century program, what our requirements are of our programming in the state. A lot of them are based off of federal regulations, or it's things that we've seen other states do that are best practices that we felt would be beneficial to the students to implement here. Again, we try not to put too much on you guys, and when we see that we try to reduce some things to make it an equal balance, but there are some things that we do ask you to do. What we have done over the past year is we did develop a set of 12 guiding principles that was meant to serve as a foundation of our 21st Century program. These are intended to cover program requirements, but they are also intended to be flexible so that you can adapt them to your own local situations. So they're not necessarily hard and fast, at least not all of these rules and regulations. The rest of today's training is going to focus on principle number 10, which is program environment and operations. But before we get started on that, let's take a 5-minute, let's see, it's 10:37. Let's take a 10-minute break. It's 10:37 now. Let's come back at, well, a little bit less than 10 minutes. Let's come back at 10:45 and we'll continue the presentation. I'm sure that some of you might need to take a personal break for a moment, and then we'll get started again. So I am going to stop sharing my screen for a moment, and we'll get back started at 10:45. Microphone. Zoom first. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so picking up where we left off, can I get a few people to just say hi in the chat or something? I feel like I'm talking to an empty room. Yay, okay. All right, you're alive. Okay, perfect. All right. Please keep in mind you can ask questions anytime, okay? Thank you, guys. All right, I feel better now. Okay, good. All right, so picking up where we left off, we're going to finish up today's training with Principle 10, which is Program Environment and Operations, which basically states that your program is going to provide a safe, supportive, and welcoming environment. Youth have the safety of structure, but also have opportunities to explore, experiment, and learn by making mistakes. I used to be a science person, so I'm big on falling forward and learning from mistakes. Persons of all backgrounds are welcome, which is reflected through your promotion of respectful interactions throughout your program. And then your program staff form genuine, caring relationships with youth and encourage positive peer-to-peer relationships between youth. Okay, so just keep in mind that sometimes your program staff may be the sweetest, nicest person that that child sees all day long. And so just encourage them to be that safe, supportive adult in those students' lives, because sometimes that can make all the difference in a student. All right. So we're going to talk first about that program environment and operations. Let's talk about your initial identification and approval of students, enrolling students, okay? So you do need to have some sort of system set up of how you're going to enroll students into your program, whether you're going to actually ask them to do some sort of application or have some way for them to sign up for the program. But the more organized this is, the more likely you're going to have more kids sign up to participate in the program. I fully encourage you to send out flyers, talk about some of the fun activities that the program is going to offer. Make sure you don't just send it to don't just send it to students, but make sure that the message is getting out to the parents and the families of those students, whether it's through Remind or Facebook or whatever it is, however the schools that you're serving are communicating with the students and their parents. Try to make sure that you're communicating with them too and letting them know about this awesome program that you're making available to them. Community learning centers should have some sort of controls for acceptable student behavior during out of school time. So you can tweak what the behavior policies are of the school during the day to fit to your after school program, but you should have something in writing, again, that is tweaked to apply to your after school or your summer program. And those written procedures for behavior should be included in a student handbook, okay? So you do need to create a student handbook that has all of these different policies and procedures for your programming, which of course includes behavior rules and regulations. And you do need to send that handbook home for the parents to see and for the students to be familiar with. students cannot be required to attend an extended day program. So you can't make it a punishment. Like if a student is not doing well during the school day, you can't punish them by making them attend 21st century programming. Okay, so please make sure that you don't do that. It's a federal rule. Okay. As far as the facility goes, as long as it's located within an eligible school or an LEA-owned facility, you should adhere to the school's comprehensive safety plan. And again, just tweak that safety plan and provide a detailed explanation of how your extended day or summer program safety plan differs from just the regular everyday school day safety plan. Okay, there may be a different location where kids are supposed to go if there's a fire. There may be a different route they're supposed to travel. There may be a different rules for parents checking students out, or a different different place that they're supposed to go to check their student out, or a different area of the school where they're supposed to pick their student up in the afternoon. So any ways that in your regular school day safety plan or program planning needs to be tweaked, that needs to be done and put into writing. And you should be able to explain in writing how it differs from the everyday school plan. Okay, if you're operating in a facility other than an eligible school or an LEA or a public access facility, then you must have licensure from the Department of Human Resources, okay? Except for FBOs, that would be a faith-based organization. So if you're a faith-based organization and you're running your program in a church, you do not have to have this. But if you are any other kind of CBO, then you do, and you're running your 21st century program at that site, at the not at the school, but at a site outside of the school, like at a Boys and Girls Center or something like that, then you are supposed to have Department of Human Resources DHR licensure. You also need to have a letter signed by the CEO providing justification and certification that the facility is as equally accessible and meets or will meet all ADA requirements. And then that must be uploaded into EGAP for approval. All right. So again, if you're operating your 21st century program in a facility other than a school, then please get with us about making sure that you have that correct DHR licensing, and we need that letter from your CEO of your organization explaining why you're having your programming at that school and ensuring that you're meeting ADA requirements and that sort of thing. Okay, the question popped up. I know we can't require students to attend after school, but can credit recovery be an option for students that are failing? It can be, as long as it is not a class that is required by the state. So that's going to be most of your credit recovery classes, but technically you could offer credit recovery for an elective that is not a state mandated. So in other words, if it is a class that is on the list of classes that students have to take to graduate, you can't use 21st century funding to provide that credit recovery class. But if it's for a different class, then you can, if it's for a class that's not required, but it can go towards their graduation credits, but it's not one of the required classes, then you can offer that. But again, you can't force them to go to it. You can just offer it and provide it as an option for credit recovery.
Okay, Amanda,
Again,
the reason I put it in quotes is not necessarily credit recovery, like through a web-based program or whatever. More of a, hey, it is 4 weeks into school, you're failing, offer parents a resource where kids could come and bring up their grade, not necessarily, like redo the class, but as a way to pass the first time. Does that make sense? That's why I was kind of like, I
Yeah,
didn't know really how to word that.
yeah. I think you would have to. It depends on how you would approach that. Um, if it's just something that you're doing in addition to the daily classes they're being provided, so they are being provided what they're supposed to be provided by the school, but you're just adding it as like an additional um study time or
Yeah, that's
time for
kind of,
them to get
yeah,
tutoring or
like,
that kind of thing,
where like if
and
I
then they
had a,
can get some extra credit for attending type thing, then I
yes, I
think
would
that would be okay.
like where like one of our 21st teachers would communicate directly with the classroom teacher that that kid is currently not doing well in,
Hmm.
what can they do to bring their grade up type stuff, and that's what that particular 21st teacher would be working towards, is raising those grades for those students in their, so a glorified study hall,
Yeah, I
not
think
as
that would be
much
okay
of
as
our
long as
normal.
yeah, I think that would be okay as long as it's not taking the place of the school day class. You know what I mean? Like if it's in addition to the school day class and it's really in their whole grade, as long as their whole grade doesn't depend on them participating in the after school, but they can go to it and earn some like extra credit and things to help bring their grade up, I think that would be fine. It
Okay,
just can't
thank you.
replace, yeah, it just can't replace the day class that is required by the state. Great
Thank
question.
you.
Yeah, and a great idea. That's a great idea. All right. Okay, back to facility requirements. There is a link here to the DHR website if you're interested in reaching out to DHR about getting that licensure, or if you need to. Okay, next bullet. Costs associated with facility rent, utilities, and maintenance cannot be charged directly to the grant and should be part of your subgrantee indirect costs. LEAs will use their approved indirect cost rate. Indirect cost rate has to be applied for from the feds, and it is assigned. It may actually be applied for at the state level. I'm not positive on that one, but it's something that you apply for as a school district, and each school district has a different indirect cost rate. CBO can also apply for indirect cost rate, and some of the really big ones do that, but most of them do not. And so if a CBO does not have an indirect cost rate that's been assigned to them by the state, then they can use the indirect cost rate, the restricted indirect cost rate of 8%. Okay. And that is what can go towards any kind of rent, utilities, maintenance, and that sort of thing. All right. Oftentimes we get questions about, our principal, the principal of the school that we're working with says that we're using their program for 2 hours a day and we need to contribute to the utilities. That's just not allowed. You can use indirect costs to help you provide, pay for that, but you can't directly charge part of the school's utilities to the 21st Century Grant, because in order to do that, you would have to have a separate electricity monitor to monitor exactly how much electricity was being used by the 21st Century Program. It would just be way too difficult to do that. And that applies across all programming. So no matter what the funding source is, typically things like rent, utilities, and maintenance are considered indirect costs and not something that you would directly charge to the grant. Anyone have questions about that? Okay. In the past, we've had people like try to charge the 21st Century Program for like their office at their CBO. Again, that's not going to be allowable. You can do that as part of your indirect cost. You can use your indirect costs to pay part of that rent if you want to. We don't ask you to break down your charges for indirect costs in your application. You just say indirect costs and give us the amount, and as long as it's the correct, as long as it's equal to or less than what your indirect cost rate would be, then it's fine. We don't ask for how you're going to spend that indirect cost. Okay. All right. When you begin your program, you are expected to have a sign outside of the site or building area that hosts the 21st Century program. Okay, you are allowed to use 21st Century funds to purchase a reasonably priced, professionally designed, and made sign. But if you want to just put a laminated poster out there, you can do that too. Okay, now when I say reasonably priced, I mean you can have a sign made, something made out of plastic or whatever. I do not mean a electric television monitor sign type thing that you'll use. That would not be a reasonable cost to purchase. A big flashy electronic sign. Okay. But you are welcome to use funds for something that is reasonable, and you are supposed to have it outside of the building wherever like parents would come to pick their kids up. If they needed to last minute for whatever reason find where their children are, they should be able to drive around the building and say, oh, there's the 21st Century sign, that's where I need to go. Okay. All right. You can also, if you want to, you can put signs outside of the classrooms that you're using, but that's not a requirement. But you are welcome to do that as well if you want, especially if you have like a room that's designated a 21st Century room, which is what I encourage all of you to have. I know sometimes it's beyond your control. It's up to the principal, and it depends on if there's space in the school. But it really does help because anything that you purchase with 21st Century funds, you are supposed to kind of keep behind lock and key when programming is not taking place. And having a designated room to do so is great. Also, having a designated room for programming is great as well, especially if you're going to have a program like an esports program or something like that, where you might need to purchase gaming systems or gaming chairs or that sort of thing. Then having a dedicated room just for 21st Century is the ideal situation. Please keep in mind that what you purchase with 21st Century funds is only to be used for that 21st Century program. It's not supposed to be used during the day by other programs. So it's a little bit different than some of the other title programs. Sometimes they allow you to use some other things as long as it's not hindering the students that it was purchased for. But with 21st Century, it is whatever you purchase with 21st Century funds are only supposed to be used for 21st Century programming. Okay. So speaking of inventory, we do have a template for an inventory form. I believe it is on the website, but if you go to find it and you can't find it, please let us know. We'll make sure we get that to you. But there is also a link here to it in this presentation that we'll make sure we share with everyone. This is a federal and state requirement that you keep up with inventory. You do have to keep up with the inventory of all equipment, what is legally considered equipment. So we're going to talk about that in just a second. But you do have to maintain this inventory as long as you have the grant, and actually beyond that. So we can talk about, will help when it comes time for you to close out your grant, we can talk about what can be done with that inventory. But what is considered equipment? Okay, we don't make you put everything into your inventory. You don't have to record every book you purchase, that sort of thing. But what, and this is a slide taken from Tiffany's presentation. I told you I was going to refer back to her presentation some. The federal government states that equipment is tangible, non-expendable personal property that has a useful life of more than a year and an acquisition cost of $10,000 or more per unit. Okay. And we agree to that. I think it used to be in Alabama, $5,000 is what we considered equipment, but we did increase the amount, I think, to match the federal. And so we do agree, those match, that anything that costs more than $10,000 is considered equipment. However, we also consider computing devices. Now, okay, so this is a federal rule. The feds say that a computing device, if it's less than $10,000 per device, that's considered a supply, and then you don't have to keep record of it. But here in Alabama, we have a more restrictive rule, okay? We consider equipment to be anything that costs more than $10,000 per item, and computing devices or valuable electronics, we also want those to be inventoried like equipment as well. Okay, so when we thought about how you would consider something a valuable electronic, or what would justify you having to keep it on your inventory, and what we decided as a 21st century program is if it has a serial number, you should go ahead and include it in the inventory. So for example, back to the gaming systems, if you purchase a Xbox, the newest, latest Xbox, I think they're $600, $700 a piece. We do want you to put that on your inventory, and include, it should have a serial number on the Xbox. You would include that. The controllers that go with that Xbox, when you buy a controller, maybe they do have a serial number, I don't know, but on the actual controller, I don't believe they do. You would not have to keep that. We wouldn't want you to put things like gaming controllers, headphones, I don't know, little microphone. I don't know why you would use that, but little microphone type things. We would not expect you to keep that on your inventory. We would expect you to keep Chromebooks, again, the gaming systems, the really expensive walkie-talkies that a lot of you want to purchase because you may not be near a phone, your central office, and so you need to have that communication. Some of those walkie-talkies are crazy expensive. We would want you to put that on there. I'm trying to think of what other examples. The VR headsets, a lot of sites buy those. Those you would probably want to put on there. Again, any kind of laptop, computer, iPad, the iPad cart that you charge it with, any of that we would expect you to keep on your inventory. Anything that if it got stolen and you would file a police report for, as part, it's part of your LEA rules and regulations to file a police report if it got stolen, you would need to go ahead and put on that inventory. Okay. All right. This is a federal requirement. So when you're doing your inventory, you do have to include in it, and there's places on the template for you to put this, but we just want you to know that we don't include all those columns for no reason. There's a reason behind it. You have to put a description of the item, its serial number, or other ID. We do expect you to mark anything as 21st century, okay? Whether that's purchasing special stickers to put on items, or whether you do it with a Sharpie. We prefer the nice stickers, but you do need to mark any of this equipment as 21st century. Again, back to this, you have to have the description, the serial number or another ID, your source of funding. Oh, also, well, actually, that's the next thing. Source of funding. So again, that's where you're putting this 21st century. The title of, I guess what they're saying here is, what she means by title is the title program it was purchased with. So in other words, if you purchase it with Title I funds, you would put Title I. This is 21st century, so you would put 21st century on it. The acquisition date and cost, the percent of federal participation, location, use, and condition, and ultimate disposition date, including the sale price. Okay. So these are all federal requirements of what we have to ask you to put onto your inventory. Another thing that is fairly new is that when you mark your items as 21st century, you're also supposed to put the funding source. So you're supposed to put what year you purchased it. So you would put like 21st century FY26 or 21st century FY27. And that way we know that item was purchased using 2027 or FY27 funding with 21st century. So that is also supposed to be included on not just your inventory form, but also the item itself. You have to, you're supposed to update this physical inventory at least every 2 years, but for 21st century, that's the federal rule, but for 21st century, we expect it to be done yearly. That's one of the things that our TAs go out and check. You do need to have a control system in place to prevent loss, damage, and theft. Again, anything that's purchased with 21st century, whether it's considered equipment or whether it's just like art supplies and things like that, that does need to be put into a specific closet or room to keep it separate from other school supplies and equipment. But and that area should be locked to prevent loss, damage, or theft. You should maintain adequate maintenance procedures. And then if at the end of your programming, now this doesn't really necessarily apply to 21st century, but if at the end of the programming, let's say that in 4 years you apply for the 21st century grant again and unfortunately do not get it, and your 21st century program is going to end, it technically what is supposed to occur with that equipment is it's supposed to go to another 21st century program in your LEA or area. Well, technically, but from the feds, it's supposed to just go to another 21st century program, period. But since we don't provide funding for you to transport equipment across the state, we just say within that LEA or area. And then if there isn't another 21st century program, then it can stay at that school if there is a Title I program at the school that the equipment could be used for. And then if that doesn't exist, then, at some point when the equipment is no longer useful, if it's still worth money, you're supposed to sell it according to the feds, but at some point, everything becomes obsolete and the value of it is not over a certain amount after so many years. So you wouldn't have to really worry about that. I've never seen any of the 21st century programs have to worry about selling equipment and paying the feds back. There's usually another alternative that you can do. Okay. Disposition, again, your LEA or your CBO must have a written disposition procedure. So, in other words, when that equipment is no longer useful, what are you going to do with it? Or what happens if the equipment breaks? We get calls all the time saying, hey, we had a computer that's broken. It's just in the storage rooms, taking up place. Can we get rid of it? And our answer is going to be follow your LEA or CBO disposal procedures. Okay, so you will mark on your inventory form that the item was broken or stolen or lost. Now, in the case of stolen and lost, you are supposed to file a police report to show that it was stolen or lost. If it's just that it was broken, you follow your LEA procedures, but typically you would just document what occurred to the piece of equipment, and then you can dispose of it according to your own procedures. Every LEA should have these written procedures in place. Again, some of your CBOs may not. And if you need us to help you get these written procedures in place, please let us know. We are more than happy to help you. And we do actually have some templates up here that were designed by some of our federal program staff that you may be able to utilize and just kind of tweak to make your own, that you can already kind of have these written procedures written for you. You can just kind of tweak them again and make them your own. So we can provide you with that if that's something that you need. It's better for you to go ahead and do that than to be caught later during monitoring or something like that, not having these and then getting a finding. Okay. Now, a supply, just to let you know, anything that doesn't cost $10,000, anything that's less than $10,000 per item is considered supplies. And the cool thing about supplies is, well, technically, if at the end of the program you have more than $10,000 worth of supplies, and again, you've gone through all these different routes, you've tried to give the equipment and supplies to another 21st century program, then you try to give it Title I. If none of that works out and you're still left behind with a bunch of supplies, technically, the federal rules and requirements say that if those supplies cost more than $10,000 in aggregate, you're supposed to sell it at fair market value and then pay the federal government their fair share. But it only applies to unopened supplies. So my advice is to open things and check and make sure they're good when you get them. And then you would not have to worry about that whole $10,000 thing. So nice little loophole in there. But again, I haven't ever seen that actually. I mean, I've only been doing this a few years, but I've never seen any site be faced with that dilemma of having to sell supplies at the end of their programming. All right, safety. Each program site is required to implement comprehensive safety measures and have written plans. Again, has to be written plans that address this list of different situations: fire drill, evacuation routes, severe weather, bus safety. Keep in mind, even if you're not providing regular transportation for students in 21st century, if you're going to do a field trip and they're going to ride on a bus anywhere, whether that bus is a local bus or a chartered bus, then you still need to have bus safety skills. You still need to do bus drills so that students will be prepared if there is an accident or something goes wrong, okay? So we do expect you to still have these drills at some point during the school year before you go on a field trip, okay? And then, of course, if you are providing transportation, that needs to be done on a regular basis. You should have a crisis management plan, an emergency intruder plan, an illness, injury, and accident plan. You should have written procedures for administering medication if needed. If you do have students who need medication or they have more severe health issues, you can use 21st century funds to hire a nurse to have in place. If that is your school's regulations, that is fine. Disaster preparedness. You need to have written procedures for the drop off and pick up or the sign in and out of students. So it needs to be in writing where parents are supposed to come to pick up or drop off their students, how they go about signing in and signing out, that sort of thing. And then you should have safety compliance regarding parental permissions. If you have any students that are walking home from your program, I guess, or to the program during the summer, you need to have procedures for that. Or if they're older kids, if they're driving to or from your program, you should have some sort of safety procedures for that. You need to have something in place of what you're going to do if a student doesn't show up for your programming. If you don't have some sort of you need to have some sort of measure in place to know if that student was absent that day and should not be expected at your program. If you're expecting the student to be there and they don't show up, then you should have a plan in place of how you're going to contact that family to find out and make sure that this child is okay and they didn't just wander off. Okay, so that's very important. So all of these have to be in writing, and we do check for these both as part of compliance monitoring, and it's something that our TAs will come out and check when they come out to visit your sites. You must ensure compliance with ADA requirements. And I don't know that we've talked much about this in the past, but this is something we should have talked about more, is that you should have at least 2 staff members who are CPR and first aid certified. And at least one of those certified staff members should be on staff during program hours. And yes, you can use 21st century funding to pay those people to go get that certification. Okay. Any questions about that? All right. Next, transportation. You cannot use a van to transport students. This is typically for a CBO, maybe some like Boys and Girls Clubs or YMCAs might have their own vans, but the use of those to transport students is strictly prohibited unless there's prior approval from the ALSDE or the LEA. And the only way that prior approval should be given is if the vehicle has passed the ALSDE public transportation section's inspection process. Here's the Code of Alabama that talks about that. So typically we just don't allow that, okay? I'm not saying it can't be allowed. You can get special permission to do that, but we would have to make sure that the vehicle has passed that inspection. You are asked to make sure you abide by the guidelines set forth by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, especially regarding transportation of children under the age of 5. So you are allowed to serve preschool students as long as they, as long as you're doing it because they will roll up into one of your 21st century programs. You can do that, but you have to be really careful about providing any kind of transportation or allowing them to go on a field trip or something like that, because students under the age of 5, they have, I don't know all the exact details, but I know that, they have to have seat belts, they have to have car seats. There's special rules for transporting students under the age of 5 that you would have to make sure that you covered. And so typically we just discourage that, any kind of you transporting students under the age of 5, even if you do offer programming to those students. We don't have very many sites that do, but it is an option that you can do, of course, with prior approval. You need to make sure that all transportation drivers have a method of communication with that program director or site coordinator, such as a cell phone or a walkie-talkie, and any changes in transportation procedures, routines, or routes must be provided in writing to all the parents and guardians and students well in advance, okay? So if you're going to change something about your programming, please make sure that you tell the parents way ahead of time so that they are prepared. All right, hours of operation. This was a requirement. All the 21st century sites that serve grades K through 5 have to be open for a minimum of 10 contact hours per week, Monday through Friday, for a minimum total of 360 hours over the course of a 36-week year, okay? So if you send your application, you can't just suddenly say, oh, we're having a hard time getting staff to come work on Fridays. We're just going to run our program Monday through Thursday. If you're in elementary school, that's not allowed. All elementary schools have to go Monday through Friday. Okay. If you are a middle or a high school and you're serving grades 6 through 12, you have to be open a minimum of 6 contact hours per week, at least 4 days a week, for a minimum of 216 hours over the course of the 36-week year. Okay, so your programming can be way shorter. It can be treated more like club type situation if needed. A lot of times our middle schools and our high schools have to be a little bit more creative with their programming. And can't do the standard, every day we're going to go 2 hours a day, or every day we're going to do 2.5 hours. Sometimes they have to be a lot more flexible in order to get kids to participate. And we're happy to work with you on that, but these are the minimums that have to be provided. We do ask that the days of operation and the hours of operation are consistent from week to week, okay? You can operate before school for a maximum of 30 minutes per day, but that has to be in addition to your required hours. So remember the hours that we used, that you said you were going to serve your program, you can't count that 30 minutes as part of those hours. It has to just be in addition. Also, this is not written here, but just verbally telling you, sometimes we do allow you to pay for program staff to work an hour before or an hour after for planning purposes, but you would not be able to do that in the morning and then again in the afternoon, because then you would be consuming too much of your funding on staffing if you did that. Okay. Again, whatever your RFA said that your hours are going to be, that's what you need to stick with. And if they do need to change, you can request for them to be changed. Just understand that it may affect your funding amount for the year and for future years of the programming. I didn't say this earlier, but I do want to make this clear. Once your funding has been cut, it can't increase. Okay, it can be decreased. It's not going to be increased in the future. Now, we may offer supplemental grants now and again, but once we have decreased it, then there's no increasing in the future. So if you said you're going to serve 100 students and you end up actually serving 150, you can't ask for more funding, just because when we give this grant, we give out every penny that we have. We actually went a little over this year because we feel confident that in the past, people tend to have carryover and don't spend their full amounts. And so we granted actually more money than what we're actually given by the feds, not by much, but a little bit more, because we wanted to fund as many programs as we could. But just make sure that you understand that if you do adjust those hours, then we would reduce your funding, and then it couldn't be gone back to the other way the next year. You couldn't go back to the way you said you were going to do originally and then get that funding back the next year. Okay. Once it's been cut, it stays cut for the rest of the years of your grant. Okay. All right. Summer program requirements. Summers have to operate a minimum of 75 hours during the summer. You should offer activities and services that are consistent with the academic and enrichment goals that were identified in your application. They should include evidence-based learning, engagement, small group implementation, that sort of thing. So again, your summer programs can have a lot of fun activities, but they should also have academic activities as well, because your summer programs, the goal is to increase academic achievement for your students. And again, you're encouraged to braid your funds or collaborate with other federal, state, or local programs that provide out-of-school time programming, so that you can really create like this really robust summer program or after-school program. You just have to, again, be a little careful about supplanting, but we can try to help you with that and provide advice about that as much as possible, if that's something that you want to do. Okay. So that's it for Principle 10. These are the other principles that we're going to go over the course of the next few trainings. I don't know that these numbers are right. Please forgive this. I forgot that I had to put what training each one was going to go into. We adjusted these a couple of days ago, so these numbers might not be quite correct, because I can tell you now. So we got Mega next week, and then the next training, I plan to go over with you the financial management reporting. So that is correct. Training 2, financial management reporting and sustainability. I'm also going to talk to you about your EGAP applications and what to expect from your program specialists regarding your EGAP application. So we'll do that in the next training after Mega. Okay, I don't know why that was there, but the next thing, this is the last slide. You must establish an advisory council comprised of students, teachers, parents, and members of your community. The council must meet at least once every 6 months. You know what? I think that this is right. So I've already gone over that. I think I probably meant to delete this slide. Let me see if there's anything on here that I am missing that I haven't already discussed. Yep. Okay, field trips. Let me mention that really quick. We're going to go into more detail about field trips in the future in one of the future trainings, but I do want to point out that your field trip does have to be to an educational venue, okay? A couple of years ago, before 21st Century was almost cut by the feds, you could, as long as you could come up with a lesson plan that showed that learning would take place, you could pretty much take kids anywhere, not anywhere, but there was a way to pretty much make anything educational, right? You've all heard of, people taking kids to Six Flags and then they're going to do a physics lesson after or whatever. Well, now the feds have come and said, you're not allowed to do that anymore. We don't care how great your lesson plan is. We do not want you taking students to places that are primarily for the purpose of entertainment. federal funds, 21st century funds should be used to take students to places that are intended for educational purposes. So museums, McWane Center, gosh, y'all help me think of some places. Of course, I'm always drawing a blank. Any kind of museum, any kind of science STEM type center, the zoo, thank you. The aquarium, you can take students out of state during the summer. That would be really hard to do during the school year unless you're going to do it on a Saturday. But you can do that during the summer just within reason. And we're going to go much more detail into field trips in the future, but we've got a little bit extra time. So I just want to mention, as you're planning your field trips, think your field trip should be based on what it is that you're planning on teaching the students during your programming, not the other way around. So don't say, ooh, we want to go to Nashville and visit is it Nashville? We want to go to an aquarium in Tennessee or visit the Tennessee Aquarium. I can't remember exactly where it's at. We want to visit the Tennessee Aquarium. Let's come up with some activities that have something to do with aquariums or have something to do with water ecosystems, just so that we can go to the Nashville or the Tennessee Aquarium. That's really not the way it's supposed to be. So you're supposed to really come up with like activities or themes for your programming and then think, all right, we're learning about this right now. What's some cool field trips we could do to help the kids learn this or see it in real life, okay? All right, so we've had some plugs. Thank you, guys. Some people have put some stuff in the comments. College tours, yes, absolutely. Career exploration, those are great, especially for those older kids. The new Challenger Center in Rainbow City is supposed to be fantastic. We've got someone who just recommended that. Farms are fine to take kids to, that sort of thing. We do expect you to still do a lesson plan. Just understand that, you know, again, no matter how great the lesson plan is, if it's a place that's meant for entertainment, like for example, a couple of years ago, we allowed a site to take kids to a baseball game, like an Atlanta Braves type baseball game. And they had a fantastic math lesson plan to go with it, where they were looking at statistics and the kids were going to, you know, keep track of the hits and all that kind of stuff. And it was great. But now that the feds have specifically said not to do it, and they've actually written up other states for doing it, even though there was a great lesson plan in place, we just can't risk that. So, that has upset quite a few people, and I understand. Trust me, I get it. I remember when I was a teacher, I remember taking a group of kids to the Tennessee Aquarium, by the way, and it was an amazing experience because a lot of the kids never had even been outside the state of Alabama, never been even outside the city of Montgomery, let alone outside the state of Alabama, and it was a huge eye-opener for them. So I completely agree that it's wonderful to give these kids these experiences, but we just have to do it within the confines of what the federal government tells us we have to do. And so it needs to be to an educational venue, and it needs to be reasonable. So like if there's a zoo closer by, you know, try to go to that instead of the one that's in another state, right? Unless there's just some specific thing that you're learning about that's only at that one zoo, you know, try to pick some place that's closer by, costs less money, that sort of thing. Because we do still have to take into account the whole reasonable and necessary and allocable part of expenditures as well. All right. Okay, so this is your QR code to sign out of this training, but we still have like a little under 30 minutes. So I'm gonna open the floor to questions. I'll go ahead and copy this. Well, I'll leave this up for a minute. You can use your phones, but let's see what questions you guys have. Okay, so one question is, if we take a close to the school field trip, we have to wait until the regular school day ends, right? Also, if our program ends at 5:30, we have to be back to school at that time also. Okay, so let me answer the first part of that. Yes, okay, so if you're going to take a field trip during the school year, it has to be after school is ended. However, your planning is a big part of it. If you're taking the kids somewhere and you can't get them, if your program is supposed to end at 5:30 and you can't get them, you don't plan to get them back by 5:30, you need to make sure that the parents are aware of that. And of course, do your permission slips and things like that, like you would normally do a field trip. So we don't have a specific rule or regulation saying that that your field trip has to fall within specific program hours, as long as they're outside of school hours. That is a rule. But you just need to make sure that the parents are fully aware that the kids won't be back until later than the normal pickup time. And I would actually make sure that's in writing and that the parents sign that they're aware of it, and that they're, and their permission slips and things like that. Okay. Hello again. Will we receive a copy of these slides? Yes, I do plan to send these slides out to in an email, the email that I've been sending everyone. I will attach these slides to that email along with the recording of the training once we have it. Sometimes it takes a little bit for us to get the recording. As far as if you aren't here right now, or if you have staff that needs to participate in this training that couldn't join you today, we talked about having like a quiz to go with these videos. We won't have those ready until probably after Mega. So, and I'm not like 100% sure that we're going to do that. But if we do end up doing that, it will be a little bit later. But we will share the recording of this video. Also, we'll make sure we put it on our YouTube channel. But I will say this, one thing we will do for sure is that if you, and this applies to this training and any of the future trainings, we have a specific QR code or link to each training. And if you're not able to participate in the live training, we expect you to sign that QR or use the QR code to scan into the training whenever it is that you watch it. And this is for you or some of your coworkers, and then sign out again at the end of the training. We will go in and look to see, did you watch the full thing? I mean, it doesn't tell us for sure, but we do try to be mindful of that. But keep in mind that all program directors and site coordinators have to participate in each of these trainings and sign and document that they have done that. And that's a federal requirement on us. If we get monitored, we have to show them that. So that's why we're kind of anal about that, making sure that has been done. But we will send out the slides. Okay, these meetings are generally posted to the YouTube site. Yes, so we do have a YouTube site. We will create a specific Cohort 27 playlist with these trainings attached to it. There's already a playlist for the RFA, but this will probably be a different one because it'll be just for people who got the grant, and we'll apply it to that. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to scan the QR code. If not, it is in the chat at the very beginning of the chat. Okay, I have a question about compliance, but would like to unmute to ask. Absolutely, Tisha, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask.
Okay, so for example, over the course of the previous cohorts, like for one in the middle, they changed compliance. So for example, we had to have the teacher's lesson plan with their PARs, with a timesheet, with pictures of the kids doing the activities, and that changed in the middle of our grant. So do we have already a compliance document for 27?
We do. So we are actually going over that with the program directors at Mega next week, the new compliance monitoring. So we will provide that to them. We're also going to go over it. That's also one of the things we're going to talk about with the site coordinators from Cohort 26. Our new site coordinators are going to be doing a different training, going through their RFA, but we'll make sure that everybody gets this compliance monitoring. We may end up recording it, so that people can watch it later in case they weren't at the Mega training. We will definitely do that. But yes, we do have totally new compliance monitoring. We spent a lot of time on it. Pretty excited about it. it is definitely more in alignment with the RFA and with what the feds require as far as compliance monitoring. And it's not asking you to provide like lesson plans for financial management, which wasn't even like a requirement of the program. And that was there was a lot of stuff in the past thing where they asked you to provide documentation that you did things that weren't even program requirements. So all that's been removed. So yeah, we'll go over that next week and we'll make sure that everybody has access to that. Yeah. And it's very specific as to what has to be provided, and it is risk-based. So I mentioned earlier again that we do a self-risk assessment where you will go through and fill that out, but then also we're going to be adding some things to it based off of previous grants or recent grants that we've had to determine whether sites are low, medium, or high risk. And so the lower the risk you are, the less you have to provide in as documentation as part of compliance monitoring. And then if you're medium, you have to give a little bit more stuff. And if you're high, you have to give a little bit more stuff, but it's based on that. So it's kind of like an award for doing what you're supposed to do, is that when it comes time for compliance monitoring, you won't have to provide nearly as much documentation as those who are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Okay. Do we use the bookkeeper for our school to order, or can we use the secretary for the program? So that's up to you. Some programs, well, okay, so it really just depends. That's really more of an LEA question, because I'm sure that all LEAs have different rules and procedures as to who they would use to actually order things and things like that. You can have that as an actual, you can pay someone to do that as part of your program. But again, sometimes schools or LEAs will provide that in kind, like the program director. Some sites or some subgrantees, you pay the program director using 21st century funds, and then other LEAs provide a program director for free. So really it's just, you can use funding to have a staff member that does things like ordering and bookkeeping and things like that. That is perfectly fine, but you can also use the schools. If the school is willing to let you use their staff to do some of that, you're allowed to do that as well. So it really just depends on the LEA you're working with and what their rules and regulations are. All right, any other questions?
Hey, Amanda, can you just
Hey.
ask that everyone make sure that they complete that Google form for the sites so that we can get them in easy reports before
Yes,
Mega?
yes, absolutely. So in the emails I've been sending out, and I'll see, Carla, can you find that email and put the link to it in the chat?
I sure can.
So in the emails we've been sending out, we've been asking you guys, your program directors, especially, to fill out a Google form. It's separate than the one that you signed into today's meeting in. It's a different Google form where they tell us, let us know the contact information for themselves, each of the site coordinators, the principal of the school, your external evaluator, and things like that. And we really need you guys to complete that as soon as possible, even if you haven't hired everybody yet. Carla just put a link to it in the chat. But please go in and make sure that you have filled that out. Even if you've had the grant last year and you think, oh, we've been doing this for years, they already have our contact information. Well, we don't know for sure that we have your most up-to-date contact information, so we still would like you to go in and provide that for us. Plus, like, we've never asked for principal names before, I don't think, in the past, or at least not in the last couple of years since I've been doing this. And we do plan to have a meeting for principals sometime I think it's in September. We do plan to have that meeting, and so we need to be able to reach out to those principals and invite them to it. That was part of the RFA, part of the things that they had to sign as saying that, as being a 21st century grant recipient, that they would attend this meeting. And that's where we're going to kind of rally for you guys and try to make sure that your principals support you as much as possible. So that's why we need that contact information. We also need to know who your external evaluator is going to be. Now, if you haven't hired them yet, you can just say unsure or TBA, or TBD, to be determined. And then you can always go back in the form and resubmit it later with the additional information on it as you hire people or put people in place. Another thing that we really need is to get everyone set up in Cognia, because something that's new this year is that pretty much everything that we ask for you to submit to us is going to be submitted to us through the Cognia platform. And that's including your external evaluators, your TAs, your program directors, your site coordinators. And so we need to get you guys into the Cognia platform so that, because the first thing that needs to be submitted is coming up kind of soon, not necessarily for you guys, but it's really more for 26. But still, we want to get everybody in there as quickly as possible so that when you need to submit one of the required documents, you can do that through the Cognia platform. And then Carla is working on getting everyone set up in Easy Reports so that next week when you come to Mega, you'll already be in there so that when the Easy Reports team walks you through like how to set up how to put your students in, how to set your sites up, how to put in your activities and things like that, you'll already have an account for your school and have access to the platform. So that's why we really need you to get that form filled out ASAP so that we can get all that done for you before next week at Mega. All right. Any other questions? All right, so just as a reminder, next week, Mega on Thursday is an all-day thing. We split the program directors and the site coordinators up. So I don't have it in front of me, but I want to say that program directors in the morning go to the Easy Report session first so that they can get their programs set up, their schools set up at the program director level. And then while the program director is with Easy Reports, and that's going to be over in the Hampton Inn ballroom, Melissa and I will be meeting with the site coordinators over in the Riverview Renaissance on the 4th floor. Unfortunately, some things happen on the Thursday schedule where we basically ran out of rooms. And so we kind of got pushed to a very small, couple of really small rooms. And that's one of the reasons why we decided to split up cohort 26 and 27 site coordinators. So hopefully we can fit everyone in. If not, we're going to be really friendly with each other. But you'll come there, and for new site coordinators, they'll go to Melissa's session. She's got an activity she's going to do with you to help you walk through your RFA. Because what we have found in the past is that a lot of times the site coordinators have never read their own RFA. They have no idea what kind of programming they said that they were going to provide and know nothing about it. And so it was very beneficial last year when we did this. And so we want to do that again. And then I will be meeting with the other site coordinators that had cohort 26 last year, or were part of 26 last year. And we're going to be going over some other things, some, compliance monitoring and that sort of thing. You guys as 27 don't have to, you need to know about compliance monitoring because you need to go ahead and start collecting documentation, but you will not have, none of you will have to go through compliance monitoring this year. Your compliance monitoring won't start until next year. So that's why we're just going over that with the 26 coordinators for now, but we are going over it with all of the program directors so that everybody is aware of what is going to be required in compliance monitoring from this point forward. So then they'll switch. So we'll have lunch and then we'll swap, and the site coordinators will go over to the Hampton Inn and work with Easy Reports while the program directors come over to the Riverview 4th floor and we work with your program directors. Okay. And then on Friday, if you're staying overnight and you're going to be there on Friday, then Easy Reports is also going to hang out in one of the rooms in the Riverview and provide one-on-one assistance, which I highly recommend you take advantage of. You can just kind of go in when you want to. It's not, like I said, it's not like a training or anything like that. It's really, they're just going to be in that room for you to go in and ask them questions or help you, if you're having trouble setting something up, they can show you how to do it. And so that will be on Friday, pretty much all that morning over at the Riverview. You can just go over there. I can't remember exactly what room it is right now, but it's in the app. And you can go in, just you know, whenever you have time to go in and talk with them and get your questions answered, because they flew all the way here, I think, from California to work with us, which is great. So please take advantage of that, because setting up your easy reports can be a little complicated, especially when you're first learning to do it. All right, Carla and Melissa, am I forgetting anything?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. All righty. Well, if you're not able to attend Mega, it's great if you let us know, but hopefully we'll see everyone there, and safe travels to get there. And we'll see you guys next week. And if you're not able to be at Mega, then we will see you at our next training, which I believe is scheduled for the Tuesday after Mega, same time, same place. We will do a training again in the morning at 9, from 9 to 11, and then the same training again from 1 to 4. So again, we're having a training today again from 1 to 4. You guys have already done it, so you don't have to come. But if you want to come just to listen, you're more than welcome to. Other than that, everybody, we hope you have a great day and enjoy the rest of your week.